Hi, welcome to Photoshop Texturing with Andrew Britton. I'm Andrew Britton, and this DVD tutorial is designed to train you in two things, texture creation and Adobe Photoshop. So at the end of this DVD, you should be comfortable with Adobe Photoshop and texture creation. Okay, so the subject of this presentation is to deepen your understanding of both Photoshop and texturing. You will learn about Adobe Photoshop from basics to advanced practices, and also about texture creation and design. That includes texture planning. So for those of you that are curious, my credentials or how I fit in the industry, I graduated with a BFA in painting from the University of Illinois. After that, I worked for 3 years with EA Sports. I worked on NASCAR Thunder, as a texture artist and environmental modeler. I worked on NCAA football, and I even worked for a few months on Madden football. I'm currently an instructor of Maya and Photoshop over at the Dave School in Orlando, Florida, where they make the movies. So the agenda, the topics to be covered here are texture planning, texture creation process, Photoshop layers, image compositing, custom brushes, vector graphics, automation and workflow efficiency, and creating reality. So texture planning. So before creating a texture for a scene or an object, get an idea of what its use is and where it will be used. Before creating any texture, there's a set of questions I recommend considering. So questions of this nature are, will this texture be highly visible or reserved for the middle or background of a scene? Will my texture tile? If so, in which directions? Does my scene have a color scheme that I must adhere to? Should I create different versions of my textures for various distances from the camera? What time of day will my texture be in? And does that even matter? Is it indoors or outdoors? A very important one is, will my texture have moire or flickering issues on the screen? So all these are very important to consider and to know before the process of texture creation begins. So the process of texture creation, the approach to texture making presented in this training DVD is based on image compositing. So briefly, I take textures that already exist and are images of real things, and I bring them together to make a larger whole. I prefer this method of texture creation because I prefer creating realistic textures and find that starting from realistic imagery helps maintain final texture integrity. There are 6 steps to this process. So each of these steps, it's not cut and dry. It's not like you get dinner and then separate all your foods and eat the main course first, and then your mashed potatoes, and then your peas, and then your drink. The way that I've gone through in this DVD, I hope you'll forgive me for comparing it to food, but you eat a little bit at time at a time. So it's not like I'm going to integrate step 4, integrate the pieces into the environment. I'll be doing that as I go through. Step 3, integrating the pieces together. Again, as I add pieces, I'll be integrating them together and kind of bringing them into the environment as well. Step 5 is usually something that I save for the end. It's what I like to call subtlety for reality, and it's adding just minor nuances to bring things forward. Of course, step 1, designing and planning, I recommend that before all the other steps. Step 2, putting the pieces in place. And step 6 is export. You can't export before you have something, so I like to keep that one at the end. So texture creation in Photoshop. Creating a texture in Photoshop will require an understanding of most tools available inside Photoshop. Below is a list of the most important tools in this process of texture creation. Note, more tools will be presented than the topics listed below, but there are too many to list right here. So layers, brushes, automation, workflow efficiency, and vector graphics. As I said, there's going to be hours and hours and hours of endless Photoshop joy. So working in Photoshop layers, I'll be touching on the following topics: layer masks, clipping layers, layer blending modes, layer and mask linking, layer transformations, adjustment layers, layer effects, layer blend if, and layer sets. For custom brushes, we'll be talking about default shapes, default sizes, stylus controls, custom brush creation, and saving your personal brushes. for Photoshop automation, and this DVD will be talking about actions and droplets. And Photoshop workflow, editing and saving your hotkeys, editing and saving your workspace, and then working in a color space. And then so in the Photoshop vector graphics, we'll be talking about paths, shapes, text, and vector transformations. So in summary, this presentation covers what will be learned in this DVD tutorial. What you will learn here is not applicable only to the gaming industry or movie industry. The tools learned here may apply well to any Photoshop project. Conversely, the texture creation process taught here does not strictly apply to Photoshop. Now, if you want more information, I teach this course every 3 months at the Dave School in Orlando, Florida. You'll check the Photoshop help because it's just full of information, chock full even. Check Google. There's nothing that you can't find on Google. Join Photoshop user groups and become an intern wherever you can. So get paid to learn. Now before we close this out, I'd like to show you just some movies that will illustrate what we'll be creating. So they will illustrate our starting point and our ending point. So we'll start with this one right here. And this is the texture that we'll be making, and these are the different steps. So you can see I'm starting to add some definition and some shadows, starting to create the 3D effect. Just added that arch. Starting to bring the colors in together more. Added some windows, some light. Well, I just decayed the door. And we'll be going through all of this. And that paint right up there. Okay? So this paint that's been added to the top, there's actually chapters in this DVD designed where we go through and create this before we add it to, as a mural to this texture. So that's what this is for. So this is the design, and it's not what we end up with. So this is, step one. Now this is all done in vector graphics inside of Photoshop. Vector graphics and layer effects. So in here you can see text on path and just a whole bunch of great information. Okay, thank you very much, and that concludes the introduction.